Today, we are at the Carolyn Moore Writers House, PCC's writing residency in Tigard, Oregon. And I am here with CD Eskilson and Alexa Luborsky. Tell us what you're working on while you're here right now. Alexa, how about you? What are you working on?
I have been working on sort of my thesis for a while, which is about family history on the Armenian genocide mostly.
Because you're one side of your family is Armenian.
Yeah. And so a lot of that project is sort of speaking directly through their memoirs and lots of concrete sort of visual things happening.
Right.
It is also thinking a lot about water and water as like the existential sort of birthplace of the Armenians. So it delves a lot into sort of like the folklore of water, and my family's town was named well in Turkish, Huylu. Yeah, so I have like a series of well poems, which are kind of like concrete instruments for me to say the stuff that I can't say in my own body, which is kind of what I think concrete poetry offers.
So what's concrete poetry? What can you define it for us?
Oh, well, I guess it's like shape poetry is another word for it, right? But it's sort of like a surrealist. They feel like well-shaped and also like have the gravity of wells and stuff, and that's why things are sort of like overlapping. So I think that's why I use that word. In the well poems, either the beginning or the end, right? Is it any portion of it is compact, where the lines themselves are sort of compacted into each other, like they've been smushed into each other. Yeah. Almost like gravity is pulling them together, and then as the poem continues, or either way, or doesn't. The lines separate into more regular spacing. Yeah. I've described them as like, like a black hole, singularity points. There we go. Like points where things are so dense that they aren't visible, that they can't be visible. Right. Information escape. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, like information can't escape them, but they're the points that have the most potential for like life or imagination or something, but it's just unseen or unstated. And you told us, CD and I, just a little while ago, you told us that you were a space camp nerd. Yes. I love space camp. Because I guess space and just astrophysics in general is like a field where you're wrong, but you try and define the thing anyway, even though you don't have the tools, which feels a lot like using language to try and explain like genocidal aftermath and how it feels to inherit all those things into a body that's inherited those things, So I think in that sense, I like the idea that it's such an imperfect science, even though we call it a science anyway, So it feels closer to art than most, I don't know, math or science usually does to me, or something like that. So you have relatives that were part of the Armenian genocide, but then you also have relatives that are part of the Holocaust. Yeah. My step-grandpa, Morris Bitterman, I have his memoir, and there's this concept or notion that the truth, if it's out, it will always stay out, which is totally untrue, especially for people who study genocide. In the beginning, most newspapers called the Armenian genocide a genocide, and it was forgot collectively. We were like, oh, I don't know what that is. So, yeah, it's like the truth might out, but it won't stay out, which is why I think documentary poetry is so important, Yeah. And once it's out, it's subject to propaganda, which makes it even harder to talk about it. I mean, Nazi language for the Holocaust is a great example of that, where it was really like made eloquent, like, they used to call, and I'm forgetting the German word, but like the bathhouse was actually the gas chamber, right? But like that's what they called it to make it more palatable, and that's like kind of what we have to avoid with poetry. It's like an aesthetic project, but it can't be using the same aesthetics that Germany used to like make it palatable for people to exterminate other people. So it's like is grapple with these texts you've inherited, either from, who was it, your great-grandmother? Yeah, my great-grandmother, Victoria Yehoyandadikian, and then she translated her uncles, so my great-great-great-uncles. This is on the Armenian side. Memoirs, his name was Grigori Yehoyan, too. And then, on the other side, I have family who also survived the pogrom in Tetiv, Ukraine, who made it over, and then a lot who died in Auschwitz, and then my step-grandfather who survived was in a bunch of camps but ended up in Buchenwald, and then which I just learned means like beech forest.
Yeah,
which I think is
Wald
crazy.
is forest.
Yeah, which so that's kind of what, to bring us back to like right now I'm sort of like investigating or researching sort of like what happened ecologically with the genocides. So like especially the Holocaust, just because there's more research available. Just like what did the landscape look like, and how did Nazis use that to their advantage, or how did they sort of manipulate landscapes to perpetuate genocide? And then what are the museums doing now? Like, one really interesting thing I just read was the British and US armies ordered as part of reparations that a German oak forest be felled as part of reparations. And I'm like, wow, we really we want to make nature itself, complicit. It's like interesting because they called them Hitler oaks, right? The German oak trees. It was like a symbol. Yeah, a symbol of like German power. Anyway, so it's like there's a lot with ecology and what does it mean to live after, or how do you find life, or how do you imagine joy? That's like a hard project, which I think my poetry is really interested in navigating. So.
And CD, you have a book coming out.
I do. My first poetry collection, Scream Queen, comes out in March. Excited about that.
Tell us about it. Tell us about Scream Queen.
I come from a nerd family, and part of that nerddom extends to horror movies, to horror films, and monsters.
Right.
I was obsessed with all of those things and continue to be now. And so I've used the poems in this collection and this collection as a whole to sort of investigate the intersections between those stories about monsters and like how horror films are conceived of and the villains in them, and experiences of queerness, of gender, trans identity at this moment in the United States, and thinking through what it means to survive, to endure, to kind of continue to be in that way.
Right. And so I mentioned to you, I know two other writers who are queer and have used horror movies as a kind of framework for talking about the queer experience.
I think a lot of queer and trans folks are really drawn to horror for a variety of reasons. I mean, when you look at like monster movies, slasher movies, there's so much camp to them. There's so much so much about that. I mean, even from like the DNA of what we think of as like the Gothic or horror from Bram Stoker, Oscar Wilde with like Portrait of Dorian Gray. The 30s, you get directors like James Whale, first like openly gay director in Hollywood, and, mastermind behind Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Invisible Man. All those being very queer-coded films as well. I think there's something about the idea of stories about a monster that isn't a monster the way we think of, like a monster and a villain being different, and seeing something in the way that like the other is represented, and sort of that kinship with that experience of otherness and that experience of exile, but then also the way that like the other in the monster's like body is represented, like with Frankenstein or the Invisible Man, like the ways in which like the body as like a physical object becomes like representative of like something evil or nefarious. I think there's an experience that's kind of not shared, since everything is different person to person, but like there's an experience that sort of echoes with a lot of folks. It's powerful to see yourself in the variety of experiences that you could find at a bookstore. It's also that question of like who you are visible to. But this is, I think, something that has been very meaningful for a lot of people, is being able to find stories or find ways to connect with experiences through those stories. I think Frankenstein's also a really great one.
And what a miss! I love. And that novel came out. It was one of the first sci-fi novels, right?
Yes.
And it's about this monstrous character who's actually a tender philosopher.
Yeah.
Really, when you start to get to know them.
Yeah, when you look at the actual text of Frankenstein, and I think also when you look at the movie as well, the original one, you start to see like when we think about monsters is the monster, the thing that was created, rejected, and abandoned, sort of cast into a world that doesn't fit its physical presence and sort of doesn't try to do that, or is it the person that irresponsibly, made that creature and decided to, be repulsed by it and sort of cast it out? Where does monstrosity come from, and who gets to assign it is a question from the book. Yes.
It sounds like they're questions that you're both asking.
Yeah.
Where does monstrosity, who gets to define what is monstrous?
Yeah. What's weird about the word monstrous is the fact I learned from a friend of mine in my MFA program who translates from Greek is that the word monster comes from a word that means to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Like they're from the same word, like demonstrative things, and like the idea that when we create monsters in stories or in films or books, they are supposed to be showing us something. There's like some sort of like social moray or like social rule that is being violated or is sort of being transgressed through the avatar of that thing.
Right.
So it's thinking about that in a very literal sense has been interesting for me. Yeah, so it's a poem from Scream Queen, though there are no monsters in this, no fictional monsters in this. But I was living in Arkansas for a number of years, and in 2021, Arkansas had the distinct, unfortunate position of being the first state to enact a trans healthcare ban for youth. And living there
back then.
Yes, was the first one to do that. So this is a poem written around that time in response to that. That also has flowers in it. Yes, it's called Arkansas Bans Healthcare for Trans Youth. Ozark flowers coat the roadside with a quiet bloom of blue and violet. The yellow bursts find room between the grasses, grab at rays of falling light. I look out driving home and ponder how, despite rain and grazing deer, resilience lives, their denial of removal. Blossoms last till morning, bring a smile, show me how much I need stems cracking slabs of concrete, spring-struck life. Parked, I pick scabs off my arm and picture our survival. How flowers here resemble folks so beautiful they cannot help but dance alone in quiet rooms, who sway together, knit a field nobody else can scythe. Night swells, but we don't stop taking shafts of deserved sun. We hold our brilliance in dim hours.